I love to travel. In fact, I've always liked those travel shows on TV. The ones where the host narrator guy appears in one location after another with electronic ease. I've always wanted to be that guy. And I've always wanted to go to, above all, China. Then, in 1991, I got my chance. I accompanied my wife on a business trip to Hong Kong. And from there, we decided to go into China. For $100 each, we were escorted through the countryside to Guangzhou. We were in China for just one day.
Okay, we are now running on the slope street in a small town.
We took a day tour of China. From Hong Kong, we took a boat south and then across to the mainland. There, we boarded the sightseeing bus. At first, they took us to see a Chinese kindergarten. They assured us it was the real thing. Everyone loved it. Back on the bus, our guide talked about the number of women imported into the special economic zone from other parts of China. Because the government believes that women work harder and they can pay them less, the majority of workers here are women. Our guide liked that he was surrounded by women. And I kept thinking, this is it. China. This is it. The other side of the world. Asia. Communism. It was hot and humid. Every time I opened the window to make a better picture, the guide yelled about the air conditioning. The potholes made the camera shake, so I braced it against my head, looking down into the little monitor, watching China go by in black and white. Exotic, from another part of the world, foreign, having the charm of the unfamiliar, strikingly and intriguingly unusual or different, of or relating to striptease. Latin, exoticus, Greek, exotikos, exo, outside, ex, out.
If it is decided that certain things in the world share similar qualities, they are grouped together. This group is called a set. For instance, the set of all whole numbers between 6 and 12, or the set of all boys with black hair, or the set of all the things in the world that are green. Anything not inside the set is outside of it. And some sets have very clear boundaries, like the set of everything in the world that isn't you. Some sets have fuzzy boundaries, with certain members more clearly members than others. The set of all Coca-Colas, for example. While some prefer this or this, most would agree that the original classic Coke is the Coke of Cokes. But the one that says classic is not the true classic. The real classic is the original, before they called it classic. And while flip-top cans are more convenient, this Coke is it.
Pure. Having a homogeneous or uniform composition, not mixed. Free from adulterants or impurities. Full strength, undiluted. Free from dirt, defilement, or pollution. Free from foreign elements. Containing nothing inappropriate or extraneous. Complete. Utter. Without faults. Perfect. Sinless. Chaste. Virgin. Breeding true to parental type. Latin, purus, clean.
To see something as clean and pure is to separate it from its surroundings, to distinguish it as foreground, to see it as rare and unique. As the ad says, there is everyday land, and then there is Thailand.
Siam, the land of the white elephant, 1891. Siamese life and customs. The impression which most travelers in Siam have received in regard to the moral characteristics of the people has been generally favorable, and is on the whole confirmed by the judgment of foreigners who have been longer resident among them. They have, of course, the defects and vices which are to be expected in a half-savage people, governed through many generations by the capricious tyranny of an Oriental despotism. And the climate and natural conditions of the country are not suited to develop in them the hardier and nobler virtues. Industry and self-sacrifice can hardly be looked for as characteristics of people to whom nature is so bountiful as to require of them no exertion to provide either food or raiment. And, on the other hand, with the sloth and inactivity to which nature invites, the animal passions, by indulgence, often become fierce and overmastering. But it seems to be agreed that if the Siamese lack the industry and economy of their neighbors, the Chinese, they have not the passionate and sometimes treacherous character of the Malays. To the traveler, they seem inoffensive, almost to timidity, and with a more than ordinary share of natural affection. Natural, present in or produced by nature, inherent, spontaneous, one suited by nature, in certain card and dice games a combination that wins immediately, born of unwed parents, illegitimate, in a primitive or uncivilized state, an idiot, a moron. Latin, naturalis, from natura, from nasci, to be born. Nature, the material world and its phenomena, the world of living things and the outdoors, a primitive state of existence untouched and uninfluenced by civilization or artificiality, kind, class, or type, the essential characteristics and qualities of a person or thing, the fundamental character of an individual, temperament. Latin, natura, from nasci, to be born. Essence, the intrinsic properties that serve to characterize or identify something, the most important ingredient, crucial element. A perfume or scent, the inherent unchanging nature of a thing or class of things. From Latin, essentia, from essay to be.
We still believe in the nature of things. It is comforting to know that the world is a certain way and that we have a certain relationship to it. You are at the center, and the world is out there, all around you. And things are as they are. A chair is a chair. Ice, cold. Cotton, soft. Fire burns. A rose is a rose. Only a suffix away from primate or primal, primitive suggests the opposite of advanced. We believe in the primitive because we believe in progress, assuming that history is a line and that we are on the cutting edge of that line, the avant-garde, moving forward. And the primitives, the set of all those who are not civilized, remain at the beginning in a natural state. Prehistoric, they live in a land that time forgot.
Or they have, for one reason or another, regressed from their previously civilized state to the relatively primitive state they are in now.
We are here now. They are there then. We are progress. They are developmentally arrested. We believe that they need our guidance in order to emerge into modernity, that modernity is what they desire, and that progress is a natural course of events. We are moved to civilize them. Of course, under certain circumstances, should they develop too quickly, we may be required to bomb them back into the Stone Age. Paradoxically, we envy them. They are wild, free, and living in harmony. They lead unfragmented lives of purity and wholeness. And they can teach us about our essence, about our origin, about things which we have somehow lost. And although savage, they are simultaneously more spiritual and closer to the earth. They are paradise lost.
This is colonial Williamsburg. From 1699 to 1780, it was the thriving capital of the Virginia Crown Colony, which stretched west to the Mississippi River and north to the Great Lakes. After the Revolution, its fortunes declined until 1926, when John D. Rockefeller began its restoration. Today, 88 original buildings stand restored, and many others have been reconstructed on their original foundations. There are now over 500 buildings. The Colonial Williamsburg vacation planner tells us that here again are the imposing public buildings and formal gardens, great houses and modest dwellings, busy taverns and noisy shops, tree-lined streets and horse-drawn carriages that the 18th century inhabitants of Williamsburg knew. Here is the spirit of early America. But the best part is the people. Employees dressed in period costume, doing period things, complete with slaves. They will, if you ask, tell you about their life and dreams of the future. They know nothing of the world past the 1780s, and they always remain in character. The future results from choices made in the present between various branching paths. Looking back, our journey appears to us as a perfectly straight line, receding into the past. We see this line as a distillation of points along a trajectory, which is focused on some distant point just over the horizon. And we search this horizon with a kind of collective blank stare, waiting, because we imagine ourselves on the edge, advancing into the void. We mark and ritualize points along our way, turning moments in our history into symbolic representations of our essence. The national psyche remembers the past as a series of points along a line, names, dates, forks in our road.
There are over 3,000 canyons in the world, but only one they call grand. When you find the real thing, on the road, in a museum, or in your refrigerator, you know it.
It's the real thing. That's the way it should be. Coca-Cola. What the world wants to see is the real thing. Coca-Cola. People wanna buy life's good things. Coke has real life. See what real life can bring. It's Coke for the daddy. Stop your life. That's the way it is with a bottle of Coke. The way you stay Coca-Cola. What the world today is the real thing. Coca-Cola is Coke.
The real thing, a phrase that is once concrete, abstract, and etymologically redundant. A phrase that points in all its ambiguity to what has been a recurring metaphysical preoccupation for Americans. When we call an experience or thing the real thing, we are identifying a quality of intensity that is otherwise lacking in the featureless background that constitutes the main hum of experience. But what is background and what is foreground may shift, like the figure ground of a Gestalt test. And what can deliver that quality of intensity better than combat? Wartime is different than other time. It is figure, not ground. It condenses fear and desire, bringing everything into sharp relief. It is not everyday land. It is pure presence, here and now. It is a comforting and categorically unambiguous place of life or death, right and wrong.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? I am Staff Sergeant Jordan of the 3rd Infantry Regiment, United States Army, commander of the Relief Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. The ceremony that you are about to witness is the changing of the guard. In keeping with the dignity of this ceremony, it is requested that everyone remain silent and standing. Thank you.
"100 years ago, at the Chicago World's Columbian Exposition of 1893, one found a variety of exhibitions of cultures and places from around the world. Moored at the lakefront were the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, as well as reproductions of an Eskimo village, a street in Cairo, a Moorish palace, a Japanese bazaar, and villages from Turkey, Germany, Algeria, and Tunisia, all complete with people imported from these places. acting like themselves. They called it the White City. It was clean, spacious, and aesthetically pleasing. It inspired the City Beautiful movement in America. Many took it as a utopian vision of what a city should and could be. The exposition contained huge palatial structures, festooned with statues and decorative embellishments. The whole looked like a fantasy of imperial Rome. Meanwhile, Europeans who came to Chicago looking for something distinctly American were disappointed to find a facsimile of Europe. They turned instead to downtown Chicago with its modern office buildings as a more authentic expression of the American spirit. And today, thousands of tourists visit Chicago each year to see its architecture, much of which was designed by Europeans in exile in the international style. At the same time, the image of a dull, lumbering socialist state without color or humor is a cherished image in the West, supporting our worldview and confirming what we have seen in movies and on television.
One of the first things you notice is the new and sparse advertising here, intruding on our pure Western image of socialism, in the same way that Western clothing spoils our image of the natives in primitive cultures. In the cacophony of competing signs in the Western landscape, the loudest and brightest sign tries not to get lost in the fray. Here, the ante is always being raised. By contrast, here in Poland, a landscape devoid of signs stands out as much as the signs themselves. The city's sameness is what the Western eye makes unique.
In spite of the advertising and the occasional bright color, I can stand here and think, this is it. Here I am, as you can on a tour bus in China. This is it. I am in the presence of the real thing. Socialism failed.
For the West, one of the most mysterious and exotic locales was the communist bloc, inspiring fascination, fear, and loathing. Communism offered a certainty that is difficult to give up. Now, the Palace of Culture, the Berlin Wall, and the Soviet Union itself have passed into safe artifact status, bound for the museum, to be nostalgically romanticized and reviled.
Unlike their 19th century counterparts at the world's Columbian Exposition, gazing back at Europe, contemporary Americans have come to love Americana. We dream of life in a small town where deals are made on a handshake and doors are never locked. We imagine a pristine, rugged American landscape, tamed by an authentic American culture, unpolluted by Toyotas, croissants, quiche, Perrier, polyester, sushi bars, tortellini, and Walkmen. We build mock federal-style shopping centers and health clubs with colonial facades, and we elect leaders who pay ritualistic public tribute to their humble origins, memories of rural boyhood, poverty, and raw beginnings. Of course, this imagined America is not particularly American at all. It is devoid of Native American, Latin, African, and Asian American cultures. It is a simple distillation of European cultures, mixed with a dash of rugged individualism and a pinch of romantic naturalism. But America is the ever-changing hybrid, where very little, if anything, is pure, where everything is a synthesis of other things and in turn becomes raw material for something else. Unfortunately, this is complicated, diffuse, and hard to get a hold of. We prefer to remember things that are formed into a kind of nugget, ready to digest. The past and the future offer a simplicity that the present never does. In the distance, troublesome details disappear. The real thing is a memory. In August 1944, virtually the entire population of Warsaw participated in the Warsaw Uprising. Hitler was infuriated with the resistance and ordered the total elimination of Warsaw, so that it be, quote, no more than a name on the map of Europe. The SS systematically destroyed the city's buildings. By the end of the war, 850,000 Varsovians, 2/3 of the city's 1939 population, were dead. It took 10 years to rebuild the city, and when they did, they built an exact replica. These buildings are 47 years old. Ancient Roman civilization was one that looked backward for high culture, to the golden age of Greece. There reposed sacredness, art, and grace of living, safely over and done with, revered with a touch of melancholy and nostalgia. Originally, Greek temples were painted in many colors and gilded profusely. The statues often had glass or gemstone eyes, real clothes, gold beards, and mop wigs. They were meant to invoke the real thing, the vivid presence and literal power of the gods. But the Imperial Roman tourist found Greek art most artistic when it was refined with a patina of old age, romantically dim and distant. He sighed agreeably over its quality of faded remoteness. He stood looking at it in the fullness of culture, his heritage, and felt he had arrived. In the modern world, everything seems fragmented, with little to hold it together. Science once held out solutions, showing us order within chaos. It promised an organized world we could trust. Science was the future. But now science, at least as we have come to misunderstand it, has made a mess. Life isn't working out just as we thought it would. And if science has failed, what then? We seek a new organizing principle, something simple, universal, and absolute. And if the future has failed us, surely the answer lies in our past. So we look to those few remaining peoples who seem to have preserved something of the sacred. We live in a fabricated world of culture and language, longing for a natural one that transcends culture and is somehow before language. Perhaps it is this longing that explains our tendency to enclose reality into manageable forms, to enclose it within the theatrical space or the space inside a picture frame. If the world outside the frame is beyond control, the world inside of it can at least offer the illusion of mastery and comprehension. We have a compulsive desire for the center of that frame, for the purest member of a set. And we romanticize nature most of all from our now comfortable distance, relegating it to national parks and other designated areas. Now that we rarely have to contend with it or really live in it, we behold it. We make it a benevolent place of peace and beauty. We collect and inventory it as a sign of a long-lost harmony. And we love animals. We admire the cute, the agile, the powerful, and the majestic. Absent are the insects, the rodents, and the vermin. And by the law of supply and demand, we love them even more if they are endangered. They have become icons of the natural, playing heroes to our anti-hero. We love them as long as they require nothing from us, as long as they give us that warm, glowing feeling inside, while simultaneously we force more and more of them into extinction. Nature has become one of our comforts, but smallpox is natural. So are cancer, earthquakes, polio, tornadoes, and death. The reality of the natural world no longer affects our image of it. The more we remove ourselves from it, the more we can see nature as a vanishing mythological state. But we are, in fact, part of it. And marginalizing it to the libidinal, the remote, and the charming has had disastrous consequences. Walter Lippmann wrote in 1925 that the general opinions of large numbers of persons are almost certain to be a vague and confusing medley. Action cannot be taken until these opinions are factored down, canalized, compressed, and made uniform. So, to take action, we distill, we create symbols, we develop categories, a large stock of types.
The Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels once said that the secret to modern propaganda is to simplify complicated things, to make them as simple as possible, and then to repeat them every day.
We crave the center, the most pious cleric, the real California, the bravest soldier, the greenest envy, the Japanese, Nicaraguan, or American character. We see indigenous peoples as more authentic than Europeans, who are, in turn, more authentic than Brazilians, Australians, or Americans. We see the real thing as more real than its imitation, which is more real than a photograph, which seems more real than a painting of the thing. And the painting feels more real than a book about the thing, which is certainly more real than a digital computer file, which seems more real than a thought about that thing. Nevertheless, the imitations, reproductions, and representations are what make the original the real thing. They bestow upon the original its aura.
One of Washington's most distinguished throngs is at the National Gallery of Art to welcome a distinguished visitor. President and Mrs. Kennedy, with French Cultural Minister André Malraux and his wife, pay homage to the first public appearance of Mona Lisa, the Leonardo da Vinci painting that has captured the fancy of generations for 400 years. The President expresses the gratification of the nation.
Mr. Minister, we in the United States are grateful for this loan from the leading artistic power in the world, France. In view of the recent meeting at Nassau, I must note further that this painting has been kept under careful French control, and that France has even sent along its own Commander-in-Chief, Monsieur Malraux. And I want to make it clear that grateful as we are for this painting, we will continue to press ahead with the effort to develop an independent artistic force and power of our own.
We divide reality into the genuine and their imitators, placing imitation in the present and authenticity in the past. But given enough time, even the imitations become authentic. Linoleum was invented in 1863 and was patterned to look like marble, wood parquet to look like wood, and carpet to simulate mosaic. Hollow concrete blocks cast in metal molds were made in 1912 to resemble stone. Asbestos roof shingles were made to harmonize with the natural surroundings and were as durable as stone.
Ultimately, even the fabricated imitations enter the world as real objects. Asbestos, for example, has become especially real. In time, everything achieves the status of the authentic, and the simple enormity of things numbs us into seeking a hierarchy of the real. Tourists, for example, consider themselves less authentic than the object of their tourism, so they focus their cameras only on the real thing, trying to avoid fellow tourists or other contaminants in their frame. It is the position and size of the frame that determines how something is read. A plus B plus C equals B plus C plus A. But A plus B times C does not equal A times B plus C. Men and women and children equal children, men, and women. But men and women plus children does not equal men plus women and children.
The world resides, finally, in our heads. We routinely travel from one location to another. We bop between Chicago and Poland, from China to Japan, from past to present to future, from here to there, all equally real, memory or fantasy.
Perhaps one common feature of modernity is the sense that this hopping is real. We now receive the world in this way. We probably always did. But now, more than ever, there is no reality beyond the frame. All our subtle forms of secondhand experience, conversation, print, photography, radio, and television are the world. After all, isn't the experience of watching television, especially live television, real? As real as cutting the grass, biting into a steak, or dusting furniture? Or must reality be more intense? This is Auschwitz. It is more than a concentration camp. It is the camp of camps.
3 hours were able to burn about 340 bodies in 24 hours.
It is a point in our collective unconscious, and it has become the site representing the 20th century's predilection for genocide, distilled and concentrated evil. And yet it seems unreal. This place is no longer the horror that it was. If it was grainy and gray, if, like Birkenau, Auschwitz's sister camp, the buildings were ruins and train tracks ran into the distance, had they left it a ruin, if it were raining and muddy and cold, then perhaps it would feel more like you'd expect. One gets the feeling if Auschwitz had not been a death camp, they would have actors here recreating what happened.
The birds are singing.
the Nazis reportedly loved nature and planted beautiful trees in this place. The communists have cleaned it up somewhat. There are park benches, souvenir stands. It's an odd confluence of something so horrific and real, and yet oddly theme parkish. There are moments that are chilling and terrifying, but oddly, the place seems nice. There's an odd sense of scale, smaller, homey, placed in the beginning of this century, not in our present, in a past that is closer to medieval times than our own.
Inevitably, the experience of the place cannot help but be compared to its images. And in comparison, the place no longer seems real. The past, its images, and the stories told along with them have become the place. And now, at a time when to become an image is to become unique, it is the image that defines the purest members. Experience is no longer continuous. It is routinely received in frames per second, and each frame of experience now becomes a discrete image, each image becoming divisible into further parts, open to scrutiny and analysis. It now becomes possible, if not desirable, to fill the present with a continuous review of the past and the expectation of the future. In a Zeno's paradox of the division of experience into isolated, observable images, studyable for all their associative connections, down to the smallest detail, an implosion of experience and attention.
So, if we make categories for everything we can think about, if in fact our mind works categorically, we should then attend to where the boundaries are drawn, by whom, and for what reasons.
Miles Orville has remarked that the Chicago World's Columbian Exposition, quote, became a national symbol for America's coming of age on the world scene, a dreamed self-image in the imperial European mode. The feeling still is that America is somehow less blue-chipped than the real thing, that what is truly American is at base European, and that the American hybrid is somehow less pure than, say, England, China, Greece, or Japan. In the 19th century, Americans would look to European culture as a standard of clarity and truth, just as after World War II, the Japanese would take American culture and Western science and make from it something of their own.
And in the late 20th century, Westerners look to the fabled Far East for the exotic and the spiritual, only to be disappointed. In Japan, they find golf, baseball, rock and roll, and McDonald's.
So please come in and have a look. Take your time. Don't hesitate to ask us if you need anything. We'll be glad to help you. Welcome to Laos.
Stranger still, what at first glance appears to be just like home is in fact very Japanese. Americans find themselves amidst a strange culture that lives in similar buildings, uses the same electronics, and drives the same cars. On the surface, at least, the cherished boundary between East and West has eroded. The tourist prefers Kyoto to Tokyo, No and Kabuki. They migrate toward the older sections of a city. They seek sumo, samurai, and Zen. But this is also Japan. And isn't this also America? Tainted with muzak, fluorocarbons, automobiles, and computers. An America of pollution, crime, gratuitous sex, violence, and television.
America is perhaps the most famous place of which mythologies are written, attracting millions of tourists a year. We are the other to the world, distilled, loved, and reviled. The mythic, mysterious, fickle, benevolent, and violent other.
Or is it that by aggressively exporting culture, we have made everyone feel as if they are other to themselves? Even our idea of America belies the fact that Canadians, Mexicans, Panamanians, and Brazilians are also Americans. We have dreamed the center of the set for ourselves, imagining ourselves as pure. But can there be a pure hybrid, an authentic culture of imitation?
Well, Las Vegas is authentic, isn't it? Unique and one of a kind. So is Los Angeles. They are two of the new, truly American, hybrid 20th century cities. And they attract tourists.
But we prefer the image of the peaceful little town, of happy animals in sunny American landscapes, of Williamsburg and Main Street, before it all spoiled, when anyone could tell the difference between the real thing and its imitation. Because the Earth's rotation and orbit around the sun are both gradually slowing, no 2 days are exactly the same length. This creates problems for the calendar and timekeeping in general. So astronomers have established the length of a day to be the average length of all of the days of the year 1900. With this calibration, it became possible to precisely quantify all time measurement in relation to this base. But what is the calibration point of a culture? What is its pure historical state? For the outsider, it's probably the moment of discovery. And in the case of the primitives, it is usually assumed by the civilized that their culture is timeless and only changes as a result of modern intervention. Or in the case of recognized cultures, it is usually the height of their cultural and economic power that becomes the calibration point. We believe in cultural immaculate conception. We see undeveloped peoples at the beginning of time, and we invest their traditions with almost sacred value, while at the same time treating them as quaint, backward, and in need of governing. We even claim the first encounter for ourselves, preferring to think, for better or worse, that we mark the beginning of cultural migration and interaction, and that whatever followed is either our fault or to our credit. We are attracted to the exotic, yet feel threatened by outsiders, especially the culturally hybrid, the economically equal, and the modern. We are more comfortable with the pure, They attract but do not compete. But even that more agreeable Japan of old was itself a hybrid. In the 7th century, the Yamato rulers of Japan, who were themselves illiterate, employed immigrant scribes who wrote Chinese. The Japanese had no written language of their own and eventually adopted Chinese writing to represent Japanese thought. They combined Chinese characters selected for their meaning, kanji, with a set of symbols, kana, selected for the sounds of Japanese.
However, unlike an indigenous, evolving form of writing, the imported system carried with it a pre-existent worldview. With it, the Japanese also imported much of contemporary Chinese high culture, notably Buddhism and Confucianism.
Thus, Japan became a synthesis of ancient indigenous culture, the culture, religion, and written language of China, and the evolution of that mix throughout the centuries. Just as Balinese culture is rooted in Hindu and influenced by Islamic and European cultures, and the British are, among other things, Celtic, Roman, Norman, Anglo, and Saxon, with generous influence from their colonies in India and the rest of the world. In Tehran, the most commonly used word for thank you is not the Persian c'est pas, but the French merci.
The Yoruba of Nigeria, in a synthesis of indigenous beliefs and Christianity, coupled with remnants of British colonial ceremony, have constructed their own form of worship. These young boys frame the ceremony, dressed in uniforms reminiscent of English army officers. And although there is only a small congregation, a microphone is used. Co-option of Western technology adds to the importance and ceremony of the occasion. The priest uses the microphone as a symbol of his power and authority, much in the same way as a network newsman uses his seat at the center of advanced incoming technologies to transfer to us the important news of the day. Meanwhile, in the more rural areas of Nigeria, more traditional religious beliefs are practiced. It is routine for the Yoruba people to travel between their urban lives as bankers, lawyers, and office workers to their home villages for religious ceremonies like this one. These seemingly disparate aspects of their lives are, in their culture, simply integrated. They are doing fine in their present and do not wish to be preserved into their past, nor dragged into our future. The third world now includes traces of the West that are not so much cultural impurities as they are cultural facts. Facts which lead to a future that cannot be easily predicted. And while Japan remains racially and ethnically homogeneous, regarding itself as pure, it has historically absorbed the cultures it has come in contact with. Japan may view itself as purer than America, but Americans view Japan as an ancient yet thoroughly modern, mysterious, and paradoxical hybrid.
Since then, 2 anthropologists were attacked and almost killed because missionaries have convinced some of the Indians that foreigners with cameras are to blame for their sickness and death, which makes what you are about to see all the more remarkable.
They don't worship any god or supreme being, although they do believe in evil spirits. They have no idea how old they are. They have no written language and wear no clothing, except for a few remnants from the outside world.
Have you ever heard anything like that before?
Show me Uditari I've never heard anything like this before. This is the first time I've ever heard this. He wants to know if that's a foreign language that he's listening to.
Does he like it?
Hey, nabakahi kwabuhi. He really likes it.
In fact, through his studies, Chagnon has discovered that the Yanomamo consider themselves superior to us. They call us Nabas, which means subhuman. From their perspective, Yanomamo are the only human beings on Earth. They may like our material goods, but they aren't too excited about visiting the outside world.
The outsider has always been suspect. He could contaminate your culture, your power, and your worldview. But now the true outsiders, the naturals, are endangered like nature itself. So we have decided to save them. However, in our image of their purity, our very presence contaminates them. We watch over and preserve them, lamenting any change, assuming that without us they could not survive, and believing that because of us they won't, as if they could not survive a brush with a Walkman. Things are usually preserved in the interest of the preserver, not the preservee. It's not their culture that needs our protection as much as their land, their resources, and their sovereignty. Mariana Tokovnik points out that the primitives rarely vanish. They simply change into the urban poor. And at the moment they enter everyday land, we lose interest. So, what do? What's the right thing? Do we leave history to become a ruin and eventually vanish? Or do we preserve it, inviting tourism and souvenirs? Should we preserve the present, making a museum of the world, simultaneously celebrating and destroying? In biology, homogeneity and loss of diversity are dangerous and eventually result in extinction. We have come to believe, with our characteristic arrogance, that the monolithic juggernaut of Western civilization is absorbing everything in its path and will result in a similar extinction. But it also happens the other way. We are absorbed by them. They borrow what they need, synthesize us, and create their own world and their own future. Borrowing involves adaptation, and adaptation is creative. We too will be absorbed by what is coming. Of course, that depends on your definition of we.
So, anyway, in Guangzhou, they took us to see the panda bear at the zoo. But as soon as we arrived, it ducked into its hut. Our guide explained that it was hungry. So we were taken instead to the special souvenir store open only to foreigners. There were busloads of us. And the Chinese visitors to the zoo, who weren't allowed in our store, stood outside, rudely staring and pointing.